Explosions. They are a pillar of the typical summer blockbuster, a fiery ball of chaos that can get audiences on the edge of their seats. But as an audience, what entertains us so much about explosions? Is it the pure spectacle? The tension built from an attachment to our favorite characters? What is the formula for a good explosion? Before we get into the elements of a good explosion, we need to go over how they pull them off. There are basically 3 ways to pull off an adrenaline-inducing explosion nowadays: on a small scale or miniature, practically, or special effects. In Hollywood, the technical term is Pyrotechnic Special-Effects, which is the science of combining explosive materials and chemicals into a contained explosion. The stuff they use is classified as Class B explosives such as fireworks, flash powders, gunpowder, and jet engine fuel. The least used technique for movies today is small-scale explosions. Well, not like that exactly. In some cases, it's easier to use a small-scale replica to capture the same effect of a grander scale. It's a lot easier, safer, and cheaper. 2 of the most famous examples of using this technique are in Star Wars and Independence Day. In Star Wars: A New Hope, George Lucas planned to animate the scene of the Death Star exploding. In fact, the animation had already been drawn, but instead, he opted for practical effects on a small scale. They built a small-scale replica of the Death Star and filled it with black powder, a mixture of sulfur, potassium nitrate, charcoal, and some other chemicals, and some additional debris. Once detonated, it can look like the real thing. With some clever editing and post-production, the final result seems believable. In Independence Day, there are a few instances of this technique being used. The destruction of New York City and the White House are 2 of the most iconic explosions in cinematic history. All of this was done using a small-scale model that looked just like the real thing. But this technique is hardly used as often as the other 2 options.
Time's up.
Practical and digital effects. This is the fun stuff. Practical and digital effects go hand in hand in most cases. The practical full-scale explosions you see today are the bread and butter of great action set pieces. Capturing an explosion in frame allows for there to be an added sense of urgency to the scene. Most explosions you see in non-animated film have some touch of digital alteration. When done correctly, the 2 elements brought together can be beautiful. And a great example of this is the Game of Thrones episode titled The Spoils of War. In one of the coolest scenes in the entire show, Daenerys finally displays the full raw power of her dragon. The production team was able to blend the practical effects of the explosion shot on set and the digital after effects of adding in the dragon in post-production. They set up over 100 feet of explosives to go off in sync as the camera flew overhead. There were 15 rows of charges that went off in sequence. The fire was shot as if it came from the sky, just like the dragon, and there was a mix of fuel and debris used to give the explosions a look of momentum as it ran along. The result is incredible. All of this chaotic destruction caught beautifully in this long shot. Another great example of this comes from the director of Happy Feet, George Miller. Yeah, but you probably know him from making Mad Max Fury Road. In this movie, George Miller directs one of the coolest explosions in years in an already action-packed film. The plot for the past hour and a half has mostly been an action-packed car chase, and yet the stakes continue to get higher and higher, and we eventually get this. The production team had a remote-controlled truck that was used to drive across the desert. The explosion, much like the one from Game of Thrones, is progressive as it goes along. They had to use over 1,000 liters of fuel to pull this off, and it was shot on its own and then added into the scene later in post-production. So let's get back to the point here. What elements make a good explosion? Let's start with spectacle. Explosions can be predictable or catch you completely off guard. In terms of pure spectacle, this explosion from The Last Jedi might take the cake. I know there's a lot of controversy behind the scene, but I just remember sitting in the theater in the absolute silence from how breathtaking the explosion was. Nothing else to really say there, I just thought that was really cool. Now, no video about explosions would be complete without talking about Michael Bay, the king of spectacle. I can't say Michael Bay uses explosions to further a plot, but he has done a good job of covering up a bad one. Michael Bay is a good action director and knows how to keep audiences engaged with the spectacle of his explosions. They're over the top, full of color, and plumes. Plumes? What are they? What are they called? Those tiny little rockets from the explosions? What?
Explosions that had wonderful tendrils going out.
Oh, okay, tendrils. Cool, thanks, George Miller. His scenes can have a frantic flow that follow the action and explosions go off as things progress. They can look great like they do in his Transformers movies. Michael Bay didn't always have that many explosions in his films. His first two movies averaged 20 explosions. Not bad, but nothing crazy. And then he got a taste for more, in Armageddon, and then Pearl Harbor. Each of these films had 128 and 162 explosions respectively. Then he took a break with Bad Boys 2 and The Island, but he came back with a vengeance with the Transformers films. There are hundreds of explosions in all of these Transformers movies, and it only grows in number in each one. Transformers Dark of the Moon had 283 explosions. Over a 2.5-hour runtime, that's 1.8 explosions per minute. Michael Bay knows what he's doing when it comes to spectacle. With all of this spectacle, you can't help but begin to feel immersed in the world of the film. Movies are an escape from reality, and the explosions in them further exemplify that. Here's a real car crash, and here's a crash from Need for Speed. See the difference? Nah, me either. Explosions can be more than just spectacle. They can be smart and advance the plot. Here's a great example. Spoilers for Game of Thrones ahead. Can you tell that I like Game of Thrones? On the season finale of season 6, one of the main characters, Cersei, is trying to regain power of the realm that she lost from her own negligence. She cultivated an environment that allowed for a radical religious group to take over the city. With the balance of power out of her hands for the majority of the season, she sought a means for which to restore all that power back to her. The High Sparrow had taken power along with his followers, and they gathered together in the Sept to pass judgment on a prisoner of a royal family. Cersei did not attend because she was cunning enough to seize the opportunity of all of her enemies being in the same room to accomplish this. In an instant, Cersei regained complete control of Westeros and further established herself as a determined and unstoppable character when it comes to her values. This explosion furthered the story by killing off some beloved characters, but also demonstrating the sheer willpower and crudeness of Cersei. This is a great demonstration of how an explosion can move a plot forward. A great element of that explosion was the tension the audience got as the scene progressed. But I want to show another great example of tension building in a film. The Joker's presence alone in The Dark Knight is frightening enough, but the psychological games he plays are even scarier. You're probably thinking we're talking about the hospital explosion from the intro. Nope. We're going to talk about an explosion that didn't even happen in the ferry scene. It shows the tension the potential of an explosion can cause for the characters and the audience. At the climax of the film, the Joker has put 2 bombs on 2 ferries that will explode if one of the ships doesn't blow the other up. I can make an entire video just on the psychological warfare the Joker manages to inflict on the entire city of Gotham, but maybe on another day. One boat is loaded with civilians and the other with criminals. So 2 boats and the high possibility of a deadly explosion killing hundreds. The heightened tension as the time continues to tick keeps everyone on the edge of their seats. Questions run through our heads. Can Batman get to the boat in time? Will the inmates pull the trigger for freedom? Will the civilians kill the inmates they may see lesser to save themselves? Will the Joker pull the trigger himself? All of that just from the idea of an explosion coming, and the high string pitch score only adds to that effect. The explosion never happened, but the tension the audience feels is real, and that's as much as you can do as a director. Explosions can also be pretty funny, especially when you play with the audience's expectations. Take this scene from 21 Jump Street. Our protagonists are in a typical action movie chase scene. As the scene progresses, there are plenty of opportunities for things to blow up. First, a motorcycle crashes into a truck carrying flammable containers, and nothing happens.
What happened? I don't know, it just didn't explode. That's weird.
Later, another motorcycle crashes into a truck carrying oil and fuel, and yet nothing happens.
Huh? I really thought that one was gonna explode.
Finally, the last motorcycle crashes, but this time into a truck carrying chickens, and it doesn't matter how many times I see that scene, it cracks me up.
Oh, that's what exploded?
So have we done it? Have we figured out what makes a good explosion? A combination of spectacle, tension, execution, humor, and meaning? Maybe. There are so many elements that make an explosion great. Do they always have to advance the plot or have a deeper meaning? Not really. And that's the thing with explosions. They can be over the top and just add to the action of a scene, and they can have some depth that can draw you in and maybe even feel something. A kick of adrenaline, grief, shock, or relief. Explosions can only take seconds to happen, but their impact can be felt long after the dust settles. Thank you so much for watching this video. I'd appreciate it if you gave it a like and you subscribe to the channel, and I hope that I can continue to make some content that you guys like. This was a pretty fun video to make. I've never really made a YouTube video before, so I hope I did an okay job. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.